Hi, everyone. This is Justin Stofran, and welcome to another interview edition of You're Probably Getting Screwed. I am really excited to be joined by Nidhi Hegde from the American Economic Liberties Project. Nidhi, why don't you introduce yourself for folks?
Hey, thanks for having me, Justin. Hi, everyone. I'm Nidhi Hegde. I'm the executive director of the American Economic Liberties Project. We are a research and advocacy organization that focuses on anti-monopoly, movement building and policy. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I in particular wanted to have you on because you recently wrote an article in Democracy titled "Anti-Monopoly is the Path Forward," talking about sort of Democrats are in the midst of this discussion about what's next. Um, I was struck in early on in the article, you talk about Mark Zuckerberg and sort of his recent moves to kind of cozy up to the Trump administration, and how while that's not explicitly about antitrust, sort of reading between the lines, it seems to be. And I'm curious, something I feel I come across occasionally is big businesses, monopolies understand the power of anti-monopoly and understand the power of antitrust. And I think sometimes elected leaders don't. But I'm curious if you come across that disconnect in your work.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So in the Democracy Journal piece, essentially I argue that, Democrats need to make a choice. You can either be the party for working people, for small businesses, for, everyday citizens, or you can be the party of the oligarchs, right? There's no in between. And the reason I sort of say that is because it does feel like that's not clear for Democrats, and they think that there are good billionaires and bad billionaires. And the Trump inauguration, just really demonstrated that actually the oligarchs, like the monopolists, like they understand how power works, and that's what they care about the most. And the fact that they had all just stood lined up behind Trump demonstrates that, because the same guys, like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, like Sundar Pichai of Google, these were some of the most vocal critics and challengers of the antitrust enforcers under the Biden administration. It's because they really understood that, when you think about why is it that antitrust action generates such intense corporate resistance, it's because that it really gets to the root cause of excessive corporate power, rather than merely treating the symptoms, right? Like a lot of the harms that we experience in our economy, they are downstream from that extreme concentration of power. So when these regulators were scrutinizing mergers, they were challenging their monopolistic practices, and they were moving to break up these big firms, they were essentially calling out the foundation of their dominant business model, which is really about amassing vast amounts of power, whether it's through illegal M&A or other anti-competitive practices. So they understood that it was an existential threat. And so that's why they, invest enormous resources in lobbying against antitrust enforcers. They get the Wall Street Journal op-ed page to write a screed against Lena Khan every other week, as we started a tracker, or Jim Cramer is obsessed with her, right? And they put out these fake arguments that, hey, our size and market concentration actually benefit consumers. And when that stops to work, because they've accumulated so much, economic power, they're like, okay, we're not able to stop these guys who see through us. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage this in the political arena and just switch to the other side and see, which political leader is going to listen to us. I mean, we saw this with Reid Hoffman saying, let's fire Lena Khan. He saw the challenge inside the Democratic Party. And when the Democrats lost, a whole bunch of tech billionaires said all right, let's see, what kind of influence we can have on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, having worked on some antitrust reforms at a state level, the mention of the word around a state capital brings an army of lobbyists around. Um, Something within what you were talking about that I wanted to sort of further suss out is, that choice that you mentioned. We can either be the party of the people or the party of the oligarchs. Um, One of the things you talk about in your piece is kind of the muddled approach to antitrust in the Biden administration. That we did have these amazing enforcers in Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor and Rohit Chopra, but there was all sorts of stuff going on that undermined some of that work, or at least kind of clouded the water. Wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and how that sort of hampered maybe his ability to position himself as the being a part of the party of the people.
Yeah, I think that, first, I do want to acknowledge that the Biden administration, by far, in comparison to any administration, in like the last several decades, did more to revitalize antitrust. And as you specifically, said, like in Khan, Cantor, and even like Chopra at the CFPB, that's not antitrust, but, and even at the White House, where the NEC wrote the competition EO and made it a whole of government approach, like there really was an intention to rein in corporate power. But at the end of the 4 years, like when you sort of see the report card, what the approach, the priorities, the intensity with which, Lena Khan, Jonathan Cantor, Rohit Chopra, the intensity with which they approached the question of concentrated power, like that was not reflected necessarily in the rest of the Biden administration, right? We saw a shift, as I write in the piece, in some cases, like with the Department of Transportation. I do think by the end of it, Pete Buttigieg did start to, operate more like anti-monopolist when he, for the first time, like, used the authority that DOT has always had on the books to support DOJ's challenge on the JetBlue Spirit merger, or the automatic like refunds, like just much more muscular consumer protection. So there was learning, but a lot of the other parts of the Biden administration, or like even just like some of the Democrats, it was at cross purposes. There was a lot more that HHS under Javier Becerra could have done when it came to the issue of like high like drug costs, and the role that PBMs like play in driving up drug costs and like access, and what they were doing to like pharmacists. But I don't think he really ever wrestled with the market structures of in the healthcare market, like who the players were, and therefore like did not take a lot of like action. And there's stuff like he could have done something about it with a stroke of a pen, but instead you had the FTC take the most like muscular action against PBMs, and now and they got had a target on their back by CVS Caremark and like Express Scripts and Optum RX, which is owned by United Health Group. But and I think it was like the same thing. You sort of saw that pattern like repeat. Like DOJ was doing things in agriculture, but USDA was behind. You saw that with the Domestic Policy Council that was thinking about like lowering drug prices, but hadn't really understood what the role of like PBMs, or like of even just like United Health Group. And I think that created a very mixed narrative outside. The same thing in tech, like Chuck Schumer really didn't move anything on the antitrust bills, even though we had champions on the Hill like Amy Klobuchar, while you had the enforcers going after Google and Amazon and Meta. So it was, I think you could, it would be very reasonable if a voter was like confused by the Biden administration's approach to corporate power and wondered like, okay, where do you actually stand on this? It was very clear with like Lena, Jonathan, and Rohit, but it was less so. And I think you see that in like just the enemies that they made, right, while they were in power.
Absolutely. I think that again, back to that tracker, says a lot about the work that Chair Khan was doing, the good work that she was doing. Um, so you, playing off particularly that sort of the Buttigieg example, maybe a little bit. Part of your piece that really resonated with me is you write, economic populism is about much more than a specific tool like antitrust. And I think that's, just, I talk a lot with policymakers about like adopting a lens of corporate power, And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of elaborate on that thought and that importance of like having a philosophical view about this.
Yeah, when I think about economic populism, I see it as, essentially a fundamental philosophy about power in our society. Who has it, who doesn't, and how we can rebalance it. And it's not about specific policy tools like antitrust or regulation. Those are important. It's just really recognizing that concentration of power can become a choke point for our democracy and economy. And I think you're absolutely right that all legislators, all policymakers should look at every issue through the lens of like corporate power concentration and regardless of like sector and like issue set. And I think what we're doing in the anti-monopoly movement is that, we're building, and it's basically economic populism. We're building a movement to systematically identify and challenge these concentrations of private power. And it means that therefore we're empowering workers and small businesses and local communities to have real agency and liberty in their economic system. Like they have the freedom to make choices, and they're not under the tyranny of any private entity. And I think the mistake a lot of people make, and I watch a lot of CNBC, it's one of the, I don't know, hazards of the job. And over there, what you sort of see is this dismissal of populism, left or like right, as the simplistic anti-corporate sentiment. But I think it's just a much more sophisticated and at the same time a very easily understandable framework, as you were saying, of how power operates and how we can disperse it. So we really do need legislators and policymakers to adopt this power analysis, to look at every bill and regulation, not just through the traditional sort of like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, like, and those kind of political ideological lenses, but to really always ask, does this concentrate or deconcentrate power? Like, who is this like really helping? And does it make our system more or less like democratic? And once you have that analysis, then the tools can vary, right? It might be antitrust, it might be a public option, it might be, you know, like something about worker ownership and unions. Like there are any number of approaches to have as like a counterweight to big, again, economic power. But I think the North Star is very clear to me, which is that we have to break up concentrated private power and build an economy where everyone feels is free, has choice, and can like, build sort of the life that they envision. So that's basically what economic populism means to me. I don't think it's like a fancy like term that's just taught in universities. Like it's a very real concept.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's I try to, in my day job with Farmers Union, that's my message to our members a lot is that people want you to think these issues are highly technical and you have to be an attorney or an economist or whatever, but that's not it at all. Well, Nidhi, I really appreciate you taking the time. I encourage everyone to go check out the article in Democracy Journal, and also to check out the American Economic Liberties Project. Hopefully, people have been inundated each week with different links that JD and I try to include from all the good work that you're doing. Your organization so helpful to folks like myself and hopefully to our readers. So thanks so much.
No, thank you for having me. We really appreciate all the work that we get to do with you all, and I'm so glad that you're taking this message out as far and wide. You made a really important point. This is not just for experts. This is for everyone.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.